Okay, welcome. Welcome to Temple University, Japan. I'm extremely happy to have my friend and colleague Michael Cucek. There's no one better than him to comment on the elections and on Japanese politics. As you know, he is a frequent commentator on Japanese politics, and we're very lucky to have had him give numerous talks at Temple University. So again, welcome, Michael, and the floor is yours. And after Michael's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. Thank you, Michael.
I'm not sure how long this is going to take in terms of my presentation. I don't have a lot of slides for probably the first time, and many of you have seen my presentations before, and I'm something of a fiend when it comes to slides. Today, I don't have that many, and so I most likely will be spending a lot of the time in discussion. But I do have some things that I want to show people, some visuals that there's been a great deal of talk about this election because, of course, of the assassination on July the 8th of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. I will not be talking a lot about that. We can certainly talk about that in the Q&A session. I'm going to be talking about things that are going on around it and how indeed the process went with that event as a looming shadow over the entire affair. So I will share screen now and start on my presentation. For those of you who were at my YCAPS presentation, I start with the same slide, but don't worry, the presentation is different. So don't despair. So slideshow. Okay, so it was an incredibly hot day, that the election day itself, and for many people, it was not until the evening that they went to the polls, but they went to the polls in significant numbers. And whereas the previous election had been had the second worst turnout in history, this one had fairly decent turnout. To what extent that was in tribute or an attempt to pay tribute to Shinzo Abe, who died while campaigning for a candidate in the House of Councillors election, is hard to say, but certainly there was improvement, and it was improvement on a day that was just torridly hot. What was amazing about the election was that despite the fact that the former leader had been assassinated, an event that you have to go back to the 1960s to think of an equivalent of, when indeed his grandfather was stabbed, and in that same year, the leader of the Socialist Party was assassinated alive on television. This kind of event is very, very rare. Nevertheless, the process of going through the election kept going. And all of the habits and habitudes of people doing the election, how the media reacts, how the candidates behave, everything just kept going on momentum. So it's a great and a very encouraging and admirable situation where the people just kept doing what they were supposed to do to keep democracy alive. The LDP, unsurprisingly, and as predicted, absolutely crushed its opposition. There was no surprise in this. Polls prior to the election all point in the direction of an LDP massive victory, and it happened as it was supposed to. Where the LDP really put it to the opposition was in the single-member districts, the prefectures, which have had one senator up for either re-election or for election. There, it was an absolute mauling of the opposition, which gave the LDP a huge cushion and therefore a overall victory. We'll look at the numbers later. This election, like every House of Councillors election, was a demonstration of the Soka Gakkai's incredible power at motivating its voters that vote for the Komeito, but also for the LDP. Now, because of this election, the House of Councillors, at least, is starting to be less embarrassing as a parliament in international comparisons. The new incoming parliament will have over 25% of its members will be women, which is a jump from the previous number, and really starts looking more and more like an advanced industrialized nation. It's still a long way from ideal, but nevertheless, it's a step in the right direction. Ishin no To, which has, in a sense, rebranded itself as something resembling the DPJ of the 1990s, in that it is working very hard to attract the so-called new middle class, persons who are in managerial, mid-level managerial positions in large corporations, white collar workers and their families, who are have been a floating vote that originally voted for the DPJ in the 90s. That seems to be the target of Ishin, and they seem to have secured a large number of those votes of people who are fiscally conservative, who are fed up with the LDP, but are still conservative. And they did well, moving out very much from their Kansai-only focus, with some key victories here in the Kanto. The SDP, the leftover of the Socialist Party, managed to survive this election and will go into the rest of the year carrying the flag of socialism for yet one more election cycle. And Fukushima Mizuho, one of my favorite members of the Diet, did manage to eke out a victory in the proportional vote. Koike Yuriko, another woman of great prominence, suffered a humiliating defeat, on the other hand. Her candidate in the Tokyo district elections finished an embarrassing 10th place, far away from the ability to get one of the 6 seats. And the sense of Koike Yuriko as a center of centripetal power that attracts people is fading, which sets up next year's elections in terms of the Tokyo City Assembly. We may see Koike's party lose even more seats than it did the last time. So she might be quite lonely as governor without the support of a party. The Communist Party, which I thought in lieu of its continued pacifism in the face of general worldwide sense of distress about the invasion of Ukraine, that I thought people would say pacifism doesn't work. Well, it still worked as an electoral mix here in Japan. They did quite well, and here in Tokyo, in fact, their candidate finished in 3rd in the Tokyo running. This election featured some very, very strange individuals. Now, House of Councillors elections typically have weirdos, but in this case, weirdos won seats. And one of them, which I'll be talking about, is a nihilist candidate of a nihilist party for nihilist people, who won a seat and unfortunately can't return back to Japan to claim it. He's somewhere overseas and on the run from the Japanese police. We'll learn about that in a sec. And then, much to everyone's surprise, from out of nowhere, another seat was grabbed by a party that no one had ever heard of. If you go to the Yomiuri Shimbun's website, it's listed as other. This very slick, very sophisticated ultra-right, ultra-nationalist party is the real surprise of this election, and I'll be talking about them at length. So in terms of turnout, the turnout was at 52.05%, which is way better than last time when it was 48.8%. Nevertheless, that's still the fourth lowest turnout in history for a House of Councillors election. It's an improvement. It's better. There was not a lot that was being contested in this election, so my sense was that 50% was impossible. My limit was surpassed, but nevertheless, one cannot really say that even in the aftermath of the death on the campaign trail of Abe Shinzo, that there was a huge outpouring of people saying, yes, we must vote. Yes, this matters. That is not the case as far as I can see. In terms of how the voting turned out, here I have a chart of the parties, this number of seats that they won in this election, the plus minus from the previous election and 6 years ago, and then in the proportional vote, what percentage of the proportional vote went to the party. The LDP won 63 seats. It was a huge victory, a gain of 8 over its previous numbers, but its ally, the Komeito, actually lost a seat, meaning that that very famous balancing act that the two parties carry out, the scales tipped mightily in the direction of the LDP in the negotiating processes that they're going to be having over what kind of legislation will come out and what language will be in the legislation. The Komeito's ability to serve as a moderating force can be seen as having been somewhat stunted. Ishin had a great election. They picked up 6 seats. It wasn't a massive blowout in their favor, but nevertheless, they came in the second place rather than the standard and the classical opposition party, the CDPJ, the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, which lost 6 seats and received just under 13% of the proportional vote. That may seem like a catastrophic loss, considering that they won only 17, but it could have been much worse. Their campaign was lackluster. Their leader is uninteresting. They were going themselves on long-time momentum, and even though it doesn't look like they're going to be replacing Izumi-san as leader anytime soon, nevertheless, other persons in the party who might be able to lead it in a more dynamic way are certainly in a better position now that he has suffered a bloody nose to eventually confront him with the fact that the party has become incredibly dull under his leadership, which isn't very long that he's been a leader, but nevertheless he doesn't seem to have a lot in terms of the ability to stimulate votes. The Democratic Party of Japan under Tamaki lost 2 seats, as did the Communists. Nevertheless, they maintained healthy vote totals of around 6% of the proportional vote. Reiwa continues to confound the Reiwa Shinsengumi of Okamoto Taro, not Okamoto Taro, Yamamoto Taro. Okamoto Taro is an artist. Yamamoto Taro continues to confound predictions and managed to pick up 3 seats, including one of the 6 Tokyo seats, with the last of which Yamamoto Taro was able to grab with the people writing in his name. Then Sanseito, which probably some people have never heard of, and I'll talk about them later. But the party that a lot of people are talking about, the Anti-NHK party, but for all the wrong reasons. Not for being a hilarious sidekick and funny story, but being something truly grotesque and linked strongly now to the assassination of Abe Shinzo. And finally, the SDP managed to get the 2.2% that is necessary to receive funding from the government. All of these parties are now eligible for government matching funds at the end of the year. The communists do not take that money because they do not offer information about their membership, but all these other parties will be eligible for public funding of their campaigns in the upcoming year if they maintain their current strengths. Now, in terms of the voting, in the proportional vote, where the various interest groups in Japanese society place candidates on party lists and then promise that their members will vote for those candidates, write the names of those candidates down as a part of the party proportional list process. The big story there is the way that many traditional powerhouses in the organized vote, the Soshiki-hyo, where these traditional interest groups that have year after year or election after election offered candidates and then brought their memberships to write down that person's name and that person gets elected. The Soshiki-hyo vote for the LDP was rather weak. A lot of traditional powers failed to get their members to vote, and a lot of, well, basically talents, talento, managed to grab the seats that were up for the LDP. For example, the usual private postmasters association was the top vote getter in terms of the writing candidates, but not on the total list. For among the interest groups, the private postmasters retained their #1 position. But the person who individually received the most votes on the party proportional list was a manga artist. So that #1 position that normally went to the private postmasters was grabbed by someone else. The construction industry voted for the MLIT bureaucrat. The farmers voted for the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry and Fisheries bureaucrat. Nurses and lawyers normally are not a target audience of the LDP, had a single candidate who was both a nurse and a lawyer, which is rather strange and odd, and she managed to get elected. And the JCCI, the Japan Chamber of Commerce, its candidate got elected. But some of the very basic and thought to be incredibly powerful groups, their candidates failed to attract enough votes, including the doctors. At least there may have been doctors who voted for a health ministry bureaucrat, but the doctors candidate failed. More importantly, the War Bereaved Association, the Izokukai, their candidate finished 7 places below the lowest place available on the proportional list for a seat winner. What happened to the Izokukai? It was always going to have its senator in the House of Councillors. Not this time. By contrast, the CDPJ and the DPP, they kept, they brought in their union support. They got the unions to put forward candidates, and those unions delivered. In the CDPJ, the teachers union, the postal workers union, Jijiro, JAM, and the information workers union all got their candidates elected on the CDPJ ticket. And for the DPP, its union supporters got their union representatives into the House of Councillors with their Soshiki-hyo. So it's a very interesting transformation. One would have thought that the LDP and the organized vote they were the ones who were the exemplars of it. In this election, the exemplars were the descendants of the old DPJ. Now, in terms of that proportional vote, which is generated by persons writing down on the party proportional list ballot the name of an individual rather than the name of a party. When those individual votes are tallied inside a party, the usual graph that results is something like this long, smooth graph. I didn't do it for this election yet for the LDP, but it's going to look something like this. I did do it for the Komeito, and the Komeito, with its backing by the Soka Gakkai, came back with all of its remarkable organizational power displayed both to the membership of the religious group itself, the Soka Gakkai, and to the whole world. Because the graph is not this smooth graph, it is a graph that tries to make sure that every single vote counts and is used to elect someone with a minimum number of votes wasted. The graph for that looks like this. This is the Komeito proportional list vote graph with the Komeito informed the Soka Gakkai, we're going to win 6 seats. You make the decision who the elect are. And the women's division of the Soka Gakkai got to work, got people to make the calls and to make the assignments, and said, you're going to vote for this person, you're going to vote for that person, you're going to vote for this person, and don't vote for any of these other people. And this is the result on a national scale. It's an absolutely staggering demonstration, which I think they just do I think the women's division just does it to show off. Because all that anybody had to do was write down a party name, and for the party to actually rank its members. You can rank members now, but instead the party goes through this amazing. The religious group goes through this amazing organizational effort, and these areas down here below, these people were all good, valid candidates, but they were not among the elect selected by the Soka Gakkai, and they failed to win a seat. So all of these 6 individuals won a seat, and none of those other ones did. Now, I was talking about the nihilist party, and that nihilist and the nihilist candidate, that is the Anti-NHK party. It's not hard to believe that an Anti-NHK party would be a nihilist party, considering that NHK is a really, really great institution. Anyway, this party, which is its fundamental goal is the crushing of NHK, it is now currently intimately linked with the assassination of Abe Shinzo due to the performance that took place by the Secretary General of this party on Nichio Toron, the flagship Sunday morning talk show where all the parties had their secretary generals answering questions. This individual would not answer the questions and instead went on rants. And one of the rants was about Nobusuke Kishi, Abe Shinzo, and the Unification Church. And then after making that point, he began to not say, chant, no, actually sing, "It's all because of Abe. It's all because of Abe," on a national program with everybody there in their suits trying to be serious. And the announcer saying, please stay on message. Please answer the question. Please do not do this. Abe no seda, Abe no seda. He's singing this over and over again. I encourage people to watch the video. It's available on YouTube. It's heart-wrenching. It's grotesque. It is insulting, and that they still won a seat is absolutely infuriating. The seat that they won, it's not just infuriating, it's a guy on the run. Now, here's the homepage of the Anti-NHK party. The leader of the party is this gentleman in the center right here. I'm going to use my cursor to highlight him here. That's the leader of the party. He was not the one elected. The person elected is the guy on the screen. Why is he on the screen? Well, because he's not in Japan, because he's on the run from the police. He's called Gashi, and indeed, the campaign van for this election, for this party, told people to write down this guy's name. His real name is Higashitani Yoshikazu. They're not really sure where he is. He's supposedly in Dubai, but we don't know. If he were to come back to Japan, he would probably be arrested at the airport. There's a negotiation going on. As a member of the Diet, which he has not yet become, because the Diet session hasn't been opened for him to attend, as a member of the Diet, he would ostensibly be immune from prosecution. He's a YouTuber, but if you go to his YouTube channel, you'll find that it is suspended for violation of YouTube regulations. He's a man on the run, and he managed to get 287,000 people nationwide to write his name down. So he finished first in the NHK party list, and he is ostensibly, for 6 years, a senator. If, of course, the other members of the House of Councillors do not band together and expel him immediately, which they can do under the Constitution. Once they get together, they can expel one of their members. This is a nihilist party. It's basically against all decency and all seriousness. And it was funny in a certain sense, but now it is quite an ominous and grotesque institution. Now, as a social democrat myself, I should not be impressed with ultranationalists. However, in this election, an ultranationalist party emerged from out of nowhere, or at least for those of us who are over 50 years of age, out of nowhere. Maybe persons who are on the web all the time were somehow introduced to this party. And it was in the list of the original set. It's this one down here, Sanseito, which managed to get 3.3% of the proportional vote without anybody over 50 ever hearing about what the heck this is. I was completely mystified. And then I decided, okay, I'll go to their website. Again, as a person who is supposedly a social democrat, I should not be impressed. But this is a slick, sophisticated operation. You go there, and the first thing you see is this. And then it fades into this. And then it fades into this. With this message, do it yourself. This is a party that if you pay 4,000 yen per month, you can actually take part in the formation of its policies. It's basically a do-it-yourself party. At least that's the way they sell themselves. And their imagery, their website is glorious. It's smooth, it's slick, and in no way makes you feel, oh wait, this is an ultra-nationalist group. This is a highly patriotic group. It quite openly states we believe in having a peaceful nation with the emperor at the center. It says that we believe that the ability of foreign entities to purchase Japanese companies or Japanese land should be prohibited. It is ultranationalism, but presented in an absolutely fascism as fashion manner. It is really, really impressive. If you didn't know about politics, you wouldn't know. You would think that this was either a fashion house or some really cool bunch of young people getting together. And they do emphasize youth. They do have a few older persons there, but it's very much a youth party, which again, for ultranationalism in Japan, is something very new. Now, I saw that there was a hand up. Eventually, I'll get to it in the Q&A. But this party has its antecedents in the Sunrise Party of Ishihara Shintaro, which then merged with Ishin in the 2012 election, then split apart. Then it became Party for the Next Generations, and then it became Party for the Japanese Kokoro. it's the same line of Nakayama Nariaki, Nakayama Kyoko. The people who orbited around them have repackaged ultranationalism, put all of the nonagenarians and septuagenarians to the side, and put young people, and gives them this message: you can be responsible, love the nation. The kokka is the term that they use, which combines country and family. And you can also be an active part of it. And it's an extremely attractive message. In their speeches, for example, they would say things like, the mass media is predicting a huge victory for the Komeito and the LDP coalition. They're just trying to take away your vote. They're just trying to make you feel depressed. You don't have to be depressed. You can be active. You can take part. And in this party, you can actually help make us a better party. It's an incredibly attractive packaging of ultranationalism. They did elect to the Diet Kamiya Sohei, who is a former GSDF member. And to what extent they are linked to Jinja Honcho, I'm not sure, but nevertheless, Shinto does make its appearance, as does the centrality of the imperial family. So this group has reemerged, has flipped over its image of being ultranationalism being something that's an obsession of 70-year-olds, and instead it offers it as young, cool, and it plays upon young people really wanting to work for their country, which actually public opinion polls show that even though Japanese young people feel they're powerless, they still want to do something, and this gives them an outlet. Now, my last point from this election is the rise of women candidates. They ran also district candidates, none of whom did very, very well, but it did attract people to the party. Frankly, the one that ran in Tokyo looked deranged and was actually, I knew something was up, but I just couldn't figure out what it was about this party until the results came in. Women. 33% of the candidates in the House of Councillors this year were women, which is a record. 35 women got elected, another record. And so the incoming class of the House of Councillors will be over a quarter of the seats will be held by women, which is a record for that house. Unfortunately, of course, the powerful house in Japan is the House of Reps, and there Japan is again very, very far down in world rankings, with only 9.9% of the seat holders in the House of Reps. Nevertheless, progress is progress, incremental though it may be. Certain parties were poor. The LDP was poor in fielding women. The CDPJ was quite good, as what were, of course, always the communists. But it was a part of a long-term process. The House of Councillors has always been better. It had 23% women before. It'll have over a quarter. It's very, very slow, but it's in the right direction. And with that, I'm finished, and we'll take questions and start the conversation, because I'm sure a lot of other people have other observations about this election.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thanks so much. I will read the questions that come through the chat because we have lots of participants, well over 100, so that's easier. The first technical question is, what was Mr. Gashi not arrested for, but what is he running away from?
He's running away from fraud. He is under various accusations of using his YouTube channel to commit acts of fraud. So when he slipped the country, I don't know. But he is not around, and they have him always at rallies via video link, with the ostensible location being Dubai, but they're always very shady about where he actually is. Okay,
thanks. So it's not like he's not accused of assassination or
no.
Violent crime. Okay.
He's a fraudster.
Okay,
most
good.
likely. I assume that at the end of this process, a lot of the anti-NHK people will be going to jail. We'll see.
Okay. Well, I think Japan's not the only country in that situation. But another question, there's actually two questions, is who can replace Abe, both within the LDP as head of his faction? I mean, he's left an enormous void. Is there someone or a group of individuals who can replace him in this area of the LDP on the conservative side?
Okay, that seems to be two questions. The one is in the Seiwakai itself. Frankly, I don't see any person who can immediately step in. He was very much like Nehru. He liked to be a big banyan tree under which nothing could grow. He always, whether he was talking about rivals within the LDP or even princelings within the Seiwakai. Unfortunately, its previous leader cannot jump back in. He is now the Speaker of the House, so Hosoda-san is out as a potential candidate. Will the Seiwakai stay together? It's not guaranteed that they will. And if it does break into parts, then the political alignments of Japan will undergo a major shift. In terms of Abe as inside the LDP, my goodness, that's a huge void, because he served as a rallying point for all kinds of groups, like those associated with this new party, Sanseito, who had all kinds of gripes about the way Japan is or has been since 1945. But he, as their avatar, was able to always keep them down. They will become troublemakers now within the LDP and within Japanese society, because they don't have Abe as their avatar. All kinds of groups which don't get along, all could be under Abe's tent of simmering right-wing revisionism, but with a lid on it, and Abe was the lid. That role, he's not, they don't have, there's no unifying person like that. I can't see anybody like it.
Do you think it has electoral consequences? I mean, in the long run, I mean,
it has policy consequences. Kishida now no longer has to look over his shoulder all the time. What's Abe going to think about what I just said? He can say whatever he wants. And he doesn't have to care. He doesn't have to worry about Takaichi Sanae, who has Abe behind her, serving as essentially the opposition to the Kishida administration from within the LDP, from her post as the head of the Policy Affairs Research Council. She's basically been the opposition, not the CDPJ and the DPP. She has been the one who's been sniping and nipping at his heels. She's now no longer has her mentor and her great support. He's going to be, he has the ability to do the policies that he wants. For example, yesterday, a big package was announced that will be supporting his new capitalism initiative, which was somewhat stymied by Abe's interpretation of the new capitalism initiative as criticism of Abenomics. No more avatar of Abenomics looming over him. He can do more of what he wants. Whether that'll be an effective program, I'm not sure. But nevertheless, for the internal policy-making apparatus, Kishida now has many of the cards in his hand that he didn't have just a few days ago.
I see. Thank you. I'll go to the next question, and we may not be able to, sorry, I apologize in advance. There are so many questions, we might not be able to go through all of them. Could you dissect the squeamishness of the Japanese legacy media in dealing with the unification church angle of Abe's assassination? I mean, our impression is that this was covered either by non-mainstream Japanese publications or by foreign newspapers.
That is correct. They referred to it as a religious organization in the first reports about the young man's distress over his family's fortune having been passed over to a religious group. And when the first reports came out, when it was an association of Abe, the assassination might have something to do with Abe's association with a religious group, my first thought was that it would be Seicho no Ie, that maybe it has something to do with that group. But then very quickly it came out that it was the Unification Church. Yes, it had to do with foreign media putting out what the scandal mags and the scandal sites were putting out. The squeamishness is the traditional wish not to be, it's the jishiku wish, not to cause alarm and for be accused, I guess, of having a mob show up at the I forget what they're called now. It's not the Unification Church headquarters and burning the place down. Just refer to it in the abstract and in a euphemistic way until enough momentum has picked up that it's okay to start saying the name of the church itself. That's all I can guess. That's maybe the squeamishness is jishiku. Don't try to provoke the people. That's all I'm thinking of.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Michael. Next, the question is, do you know where the Sanseito's funding comes from?
It's self-funded. It's a GoFundMe party. It actually has a ticker on the website, which is ticking off the amount of money that has come in. So it is truly putting itself forward as your party that you are making. It's in, for those of us who don't live on our mobile phones, it's something that we were absolutely unaware of. But for those who live that lifestyle, they must have had ads that came up through YouTube and all kinds of different ways of attracting young people to this new party. But they say they are crowdfunded. That's the word I was looking for. They're a crowd-funded party.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question also about the results in Tokyo, where one commentator says that the percentage of LDP and conservative votes was slightly lower than that of the opposition, but that the LDP did better in terms of seats.
In terms of the district election?
Yeah, in Tokyo. But in other words, they got more seats.
That works out. That works out fine. You know, the 34% of the proportional vote goes to the LDP. If you split it pretty much halfway, that's 17 and 17, which is more than enough to knock off an opposition candidate. The candidate seeking re-election, Asahi, he won handily. Less easy was the Onyanko Club veteran woman who was a talent from the 1980s, I guess. So Onyanko Club must have been 1986. The girl group by the same person who gave us AKB48, but his first girl group. She got just above. So she was not. It was not an overwhelming win, but the LDP has enough of its own supporters to get two candidates in. Then the Komeito, of course, will get their candidate, and that's half of the seats there. And the opposition split up the other three. So it's not surprising. A point on there's a lot of press about the woman candidate who won for the LDP, in the fact that she turned down interviews from all of the TV networks after her victory, and her staff explained it because she doesn't understand policy. Everybody's saying, then why is she elected? Why was she a candidate if she doesn't understand policy? She was elected, she was on a candidate because she's from a former girls group and people knew her name and they were willing to write that name down.
What can be done to increase female representation?
what can be done to increase female representation would be for a lot of LDP representatives to suddenly say, you know, even though my family's been doing this for 3 generations, we better stop and let somebody else do it. That's what it would take. The legacy LDP members stand in the way of real female participation, women's participation. The legacy trumps any other qualities involved in the single member district. And therefore, if there is going to be progress, the LDP would have to do the improbable, such as having only women candidates on its proportional list. But that is also impossible in the House of Representatives, because the House of Representatives proportional list is the first seats are all double listed candidates who are also candidates in the single member districts, who are mostly men, which gets us back to where we were before. So there, in the House of Reps, there doesn't seem to be a way other than mass resignation. In the House of Councillors, all the parties can just simply be putting more and more women as their candidates. They have an incentive to do so. Those who are longtime senators can be asked to retire. Come on, it's not that important to your life to be a senator. There could be movement there, but in the House of Reps, nothing that I can think of.
And what is, you mentioned how good the Soka Gakkai was in getting votes and in making sure that the utility of votes was maximized. Does the Soka Gakkai have influence on the LDP also, as opposed to its role as the bedrock of the Komeito?
Well, of course they do, because they are the background organization that is providing in the single member districts up to 20 or even 25% in the House of Representatives of the votes that are going to the LDP candidate. They're the LDP member in a district has to be aware of the Soka Gakkai because a quarter of his voters will be members of that religious group. It's inconceivable that they would keep them at arm's length and just let the Komeito be entirely in charge of the relationship. That I don't think is possible, and it also would be ill-advised, I think. But nevertheless, we're not going to hear a lot about that because the Komeito is supposedly the intermediary between the Soka Gakkai and the LDP.
I see. Thank you. What is we're talking about constitutional revision. What is the role of the upper house in constitutional revision? And in general, if you could explain to some of the participants, what are the powers of the upper house?
Okay, in the case of the first part of the question, 2/3 of the members of the House of Councillors must vote for any amendment or change to the Constitution. This would come presumably after 2/3 of the House of Representatives had voted on this amendment first. At that point, with 2/3 passages in both houses, then it would be thrown to the voters in a national referendum, where 50% plus 1 vote of the people would be necessary, who are voting, would be necessary for the passage of that change to the Constitution. So the House of Councillors has basically an equal role to that of the House of Representatives in constitutional revision. The powers of the House of Councillors are very limited. It can slow down legislation, but when there is a coalition 2/3 majority, as it does exist in the House of Representatives, virtually anything that the House of Councillors tries to slow down or stop will be overridden by the House of Representatives. The only thing that the House of Councillors can do to thwart or the hopes of the House of Reps is kill political appointments to organizations such as the Bank of Japan. There, the House of Councillors has rejected candidates who have been approved by the House of Reps, and that's the end of their candidature. They cannot be reconsidered. They're rejected. But for most cases, the House of Councillors has very little in the way of powers. The House of Representatives can topple the government in a vote of no confidence. The House of Councillors can say, you've been a very bad government, and that's all. Or they can censure a government, but they cannot do it. That does not have any effective outcome. So it's a much weaker house.
Okay, thank you. And another question on the assassination of former Prime Minister Abe. One question is, first, why was it characterized as an attack on democracy? Because it seems it was just the act of an unbalanced person, as opposed to, say, a plot, as was a case of the 1930s assassinations in Japan. And secondly, why does the Japanese media avoid using the term assassination?
That I am not sure about, that second point. Why have they said shot, but not ansatsu, assassinated? Are they saving it for the discovery that it indeed is actually a group of MSDF naval cadets who is behind it, or what? I don't understand that at all. I suppose it's trying not to glorify the assailant, who is a completely deranged young man who is maritime self-defense forces as well. You might want to be trying to keep those things separate. Now, in terms of the first point, well, it gives nobility to what is otherwise just stupid. And it makes Abe a martyr rather than just someone who was chosen by a madman. The actual act of an attack on democracy is not necessarily on Abe himself, but on Abe as a campaigner, someone who is engaged in a political campaign in a country where there is real retail politics, where you can get very close to and take pictures with candidates who have very important positions. This is very much a country where being able to physically be in the presence of even the highest leaders of the country is assumed. And that is a part of the democracy. And indeed, the campaigning in Japan is very retail. You know, what was Abe doing in a nondescript turnoff somewhere in Nara Prefecture on behalf of some candidate? What was he doing there? Well, that's just the way we do politics here. And that's I think also has to do something with this characterization that seems grandiose of an attack on democracy.
Another question is, notwithstanding the LDP's strong showing, its PR vote appears to have fallen from previous elections. Is that the case? How should it be interpreted?
34% is right on the line. It did no better or no worse than any other time. Of course, if you step back and you say, okay, if you have 50% of the electorate showing up, or just over 50%, that means the LDP is in a massively powerful position based on the support of 17% of the voters, which seems weird and disproportionate. Has it undergone any decay? No, that 17% is solid, but it's only 17%. They are very good at maintaining all kinds of advantages, including in the House of Representatives, the drawing of the map for the House of Representatives districts that maximize their voters' power. But in the aggregate, they're right where they always are. There's not really decay, as I can see.
Thank you. The other question is, it's about the Sanseito. If it allows voters to make policies through a kind of subscription program, would they change their beliefs if their subscribers wanted different policies?
Ostensibly, yes. I do not believe that's the case. I believe there's a certain amount of self-deception involved in the people who sign up. I don't see it changing. Now, the reason why I think that is because in their materials that they present on their cover sheet and also on the poster, like for their posters, like the one that was that was up on the signboard that I had there and put the square around. They're talking about policies that have nothing to do with nationalism. They're talking about socioeconomic policies. So that they present themselves as as a party that is interested in the socioeconomic positions of people who are either in part-time work or are juggling raising a child and trying to stay employed. That's the way they frame themselves on their cover sheet. It's only when you get to their website and you then look into their policy mixes that you start to see the nationalism. So my sense is that deception goes further, goes right to the supporters, that they're not aware of the fact that they're actually not changing the policies. That I think that there is a manner of some deception. I may be wrong, but that's my impression from the website and their materials.
Thank you. Could you elaborate on Ishin? You mentioned they showed that they could break out of Kansai. Could it become a national opposition party? Could they displace this CDPJ as the most viable opposition party?
I don't think so. A lot of their recruits, particularly here in the Kanto, were retreads from various opposition parties in the past. Example is Matsuzawa Yoshifumi in Kanazawa, who ran as an Ishin candidate, who had previously been a Hope Party candidate, who had previously all the way back, I believe, all the way to the old DPJ. There are a lot of folks who just like being in office, who are being picked up because they can put together enough votes to use the system, particularly the system of the House of Councillors, to their advantage. As an actual opposition party, they're not really an opposition party. They are the hidden leader, Hashimoto Toru, was very close to Shinzo Abe, had asked Abe to become leader of his party back when Abe was in the wilderness. They're not really an opposition. They are just a non-LDP alternative. And certainly if the LDP proposes anything, they will not be opposing it. So they're portrayed as an opposition party, but they are a vehicle of Kansai aspirations. They are a vehicle of a certain set of individuals, Matsui, Yoshimura, and Hashimoto. And they do try very hard to steal the old DPJ white collar vote. And I think they're going to be somewhat successful in doing that.
Thank you. One short question. Is there no representative of the War Bereaved Association now in the House of Councillors?
I have to look at the who was up for re-election and who was whether they have still one senator. I have to check that. I'm not sure. The one who lost was the more visible one and the one that everybody talked about. So they may have another candidate in the other part of the 6-year cycle. I can't answer that right now. But that it does bring up a point. I am very certain the reason why the war bereaved candidate did not win is because so many voters voted for this new right-wing party that would normally vote for the Soka Gakkai candidate for the LDP. that this new party drew support out of that that group. I guess you could call it the Tamogami voter, after old General Toshio Tamogami Toshio, who suddenly came up, who arose politically and attracted all kinds of people to his unapologetic views about pre-1945 Japan. I think those people have gravitated or been have found this Sanseito and have moved out of support for the Yasukuni people in the LDP.
So in a way, they've weakened the Yasukuni crowd by taking them from the core party to a very marginal and irrelevant organization.
I would not call it irrelevant. I think it's going to have legs, but it is a marginal entity at present.
Okay, are there any programs in terms of education reform in the current political environment? And if so, what would it mean? I mean, does education play a role in Japanese politics? I mean, the politics of education, of school system?
Well, the loss of Abe, who was very interested in education as the factory of the citizen, the factory that produces the citizens of the future, the school is that for Abe and his people. They were interested in fiddling with how that output would turn out. I don't see Kishida and his people interested in that. That they're relatively sanguine about the Japan that already exists. So I don't know what kind of reforms they would try to undertake. It's certainly not in making the country more patriotic. That's not where Kishida is coming from. He's the longest serving Ministry of Foreign Affairs minister, MOFA. He's the longest, since he's got that in his bones. He's going to be far less interested in the kinds of reforms that Abe Shinzo and people like Hagiura Koichi have been pressing and pushing for during the Abe years.
Thank you. And one question about the Gobunoto.
I don't know about them. They're another one of these fringe parties that put forth candidates. It may be simply there to attract followers to some kind of organization, or to attract donations and have no actual political significance whatsoever. That's one of the techniques, that's one of the aspects of the House of Councillors election that people don't talk about. For washed up stars, washed up folks who can't get support or can't get gigs anymore, it's great advertising to run for office in the House of Councillors election. It's relatively low cost. For 3 million yen, you can run in a district. You get your poster up, people interview you, you're somebody again. And for a lot of fringe organizations and fringe individuals, the House of Councillors election is a huge opportunity to do PR at a relatively low cost, and so they do it. So that's how I characterize a lot of the people way down ballot. They're doing it to make themselves known.
Okay, so it's kind of government-sponsored advertising.
Yes, and you get 5 minutes on NHK to do whatever you want. And they do whatever they want. It has become quite wild what certain groups will do during that free airtime on the premier channel and on the national channel.
They've been, for a long time, there've been lawsuits arguing that voters in urban districts are underrepresented, voters in rural areas are overrepresented. Where do all these suits stand? Could they lead to the election results being contested? And just looking forward in the future, I know there's going to be some reallocation of seats in the House of Representatives, including apparently, I think, one that's supposed to be taken away from Yamaguchi Prefecture. So if you could comment on this thing.
The Supreme Court has come up with a third status aside from constitutional versus unconstitutional. And it uses it exclusively for these questions having to do with the boundaries and the populations of electoral districts. Under Article 14 of the Constitution, all the citizens of Japan should be equal, which should mean that all the electoral districts should have the same number of voters in them. They do not. And the disparities are acceptable, according to the Supreme Court in the House of Reps, up to 2 times as many people in one district as another. After that, it becomes a problem, but it cannot be unconstitutional because the only people who can draw a map of a district are the representatives themselves. That's in the Constitution, that all matters having to do with changing the borders of a district must be done by the House of Reps itself. If the House of Reps is found to be unconstitutional, it can't draw the map because they are not legitimate representatives. So what the Supreme Court has said, what just happened was a state of unconstitutionality. It's not unconstitutional, but it's a state of unconstitutionality, which is a code word to the LDP: fix the map so as not to insult our intelligence. And we'll leave it at that. So no, the elections will not be invalidated because the only body that can draw the map is the body that has been elected using that unfair map. It's a constitutional problem that might have been visible if they had Americans who wrote the Constitution had more than a week to work through all of the details. They didn't, and so it's a little place where the Constitution spins out of control. And so the Supreme Court has found a fiddle saying it's not unconstitutional, but it's not really constitutional either. And that is this midway point, a state of unconstitutionality. And in the dance, the LDP responds by redrawing the map so that the smallest district and the largest district, the differences between them are just under 2.0.
Thank you. And it's actually something that's very common in many countries. I mean, even if you think of the Senate in the United States, the population gap between the largest and smallest state, both of which have only 2 senators, is much larger. We don't have a lot of time left, so I will go with one of the questions and maybe ask you to give us a few final words. Is what worries you most about Japanese politics? And then if you have anything to add.
Japanese politics is dying at the local level. Increasingly, town and city assembly seats, even prefectural assembly seats, are being awarded to persons who simply show up, pay the deposit that you have to pay to run as a candidate, and that person is the only person who signs up, and there's no election that's held. And just because you showed up, you become an official. You're not an elected official. There was no election. Increasingly, that is happening at the lower levels of democracy. Democracy is dying at the roots. And that's bad. And that's worrisome. There should be competition at all levels. And that's the whole purpose of democracy, the competition of ideas, the clashing and the banging together of different versions of what I'm going to do is a necessary part of democracy that is dying at the local level. And in some districts even, or in some municipalities even, there are fewer candidates than actually the number of seats on the assembly. They start out with an empty seat. This bothers me and worries me about Japanese politics.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I know you have to go in a few minutes. So thanks a lot. We're extremely grateful to you because you've always been willing to give us a lot of your time after Japanese elections. And the next big ones are in 3 years, but I'm sure we'll have you at ICAS sooner than in 3 years. So thanks again. Thank you to all the participants. If you'd like to be on our email list, just send us an email. I will put it on the chat box and we will add you to the list. So thanks again, Michael, and we wish everybody a very nice day. So thanks. Thank you.